Investments are a very important aspect of retirement funds, and I'm joined today by Aeysha Samsodien, who's a senior equity analyst at M&G Investments, and we're discussing investments in the South African context on a very broad platform based on infrastructure development, energy transition, technology development, the importance of the mining sector, resources, and a whole host of things, all intended, I suppose, to bring South Africa Inc. up a couple of notches from a development perspective. Aeysha, good morning.
Good morning, Chris. I'm very excited to be here and discuss the mining sector in South Africa and the broad outlook on the sector as well. And maybe to start with, and the first question we can potentially ask this morning is, what's the mining sector's role in South Africa? And then if you look at the mining sector has a significant role in South African economy and has been an underpin to the country's infrastructure development over the last few decades. If you look at recent data, in 2022, the mining sector was just under 8% of GDP, or in absolute basis, around 500 billion contribution. The sector is also a large contributor to the South African fiscus, where it contributed about 73 billion in taxes in 2022, sorry. That is 21% of the total company taxes paid. It's also a large employer and employs about 500,000 direct employees. If you look at current data over the last few months, it's estimated that for the first 6 months of 2023, that 58% of the exports was from the mining sector. And then where we're sitting today, and my role is how do we get exposure to that sector? And we can get exposure to the sector via the JSE, where a third of the JSE or the stock market is exposed to mining companies. But there is also on the JSE mining companies that no longer have operations in South Africa. For example, BHP, it's a global mining company, but it doesn't have operations in SA anymore. Similarly, Anglo Gold, global mining company, no longer have operations in South Africa. What does that mean for us from a JSE perspective is that we're getting even broader global diversification to global mining.
So Aeysha, tell me, what is the key role that the mining sector will play for the next decade?
So one of the key areas, if you think about infrastructure development and commodities, is energy transition. And this is as we move fuels to cleaner sources of energy to mitigate the risk of global warming. So energy transition is structured in what we think about as energy transition pillars. So electric vehicles, renewables, storage, and the grid. And underpinning those energy transition pillars are the underlying commodities that are needed and are critical to reach those aspirations that we need to decrease global warming, combat climate change. What is important to note about the commodities that you're actually going to need as we walk around this energy transition journey is these are commodities that are used in our everyday lives. So if you think about copper at the moment, copper is used in our everyday lives if you look at the wiring. Aluminium is a key metal that's going to be needed in energy transition, and aluminium is used in the auto bodies of your cars as well. Similarly, if you think about nickel, nickel is used in plating, and nickel is going to be critical for batteries going forward. But as we move along this energy transition journey, which is going to be a multi-decade journey, the key part of it is how your energy source is going to change in the global economy. We're going to move from a fossil fuel-based energy sources to one that is more metal intensive, and this is where the mining sector is going to be critical. But when we think about energy transition, we usually think about renewables and electric vehicles. But what's going to be significant and what's going to require significant investment is going to be storage. Because renewable energy, which is effectively wind and solar, are intermittent, so they don't give you that same base load. So, for example, when you think about base load, if you think about the coal-fired power station, it runs flat out, so it runs 24/7, so it gives you that stable electricity. But the renewables are intermittent because it depends, is the wind blowing, is the sun shining, so it needs that storage investment. Another critical part is going to be investment in the transmissions grid. And that's effectively how energy flows. So currently, most energy will flow from the coal-fired power stations the way it's needed. But as we walk this journey and building more and more renewables, that energy flow is going to need to change. So energy is going to need to flow from those renewable sources to where it's going to be needed. Another big part of this energy transition journey, while it is going to be commodities intensive, is going to be technology. So if you think about battery storage, lots of technology or investment in technology is going to be needed to find the right source and the right way that this metals and energy is going to be structured.
Right.
One of the big concerns that we have in the market or globally is that there isn't actually sufficient commodity supply available to meet the energy transition because there hasn't been sufficient investment in supply over the last decade. Therefore, as we walk this energy transition journey, what is critical is that it remains affordable because effectively you don't want to leave any one country behind. Therefore, fossil fuel energy sources is still going to be needed part of the overall energy mix. So therefore, when you think about energy transition, you also need to think about energy security. And energy security underpins that fossil fuels, i.e. coal, is still going to be needed in this journey.
So what role does South Africa play in all of this?
Thanks, Chris. So South Africa can play an integral role in both energy security and energy transition because we actually have commodities that can play in both those spheres. But, and this is where the large challenge comes and the challenge that we actually face today. The South African mining sector has significant challenges from their own infrastructure perspective, which can impact the investment into the sector going forward, and therefore it can also impact our country's ability to participate in this transition. So there are two key infrastructure challenges that we are facing at the moment, and the first is Eskom's energy availability, and we all know the impact that load shedding has on our lives. But unfortunately, load shedding has a detrimental impact on mining operations because one of the key things is if it's not safe to send someone underground, you're not going to do that, so it can't operate. The other part and the other key infrastructure challenge is Transnet's rail performance. We have seen, if you look maybe at Eskom first, we have seen how electricity unavailability has impacted mining operations. But for miners to want to invest in growth, you're going to need stable electricity. And rail performance is a critical component as well, or the rail infrastructure is critical. We in our everyday lives, we don't really think about Transnet's performance, but rail performance is critical to bulk mining. And that's where you think about coal mining and also think about those energy transition metals that's actually going to be needed in the future. For example, manganese. Manganese is a metal that's going to be important going forward, but it needs to be transported via rail, which is optimal. Over the last few years, we saw how rail performance has deteriorated over a very short period of time. We have seen commodities being trucked, but this is not a sustainable option. It damages the road infrastructure and it's much more expensive. So if you're looking at the situation at the moment, both energy and rail is at a critical point for the mining sector and the broader South African economy. And it needs to be looked at and it needs to be addressed. But there is positive green shoots coming out of it, and the needle shifting a bit more positive, because what we are seeing is that the mining sector is actually stepping forward to assist in those infrastructure challenges. And one of the key work that they're doing is actually tying technology into improving those operational performance. And getting this infrastructure to work properly is actually going to be vital for South Africa to meaningfully participate in the opportunities that's going to come forth. And it's also critical to ensure that we maintain our current mining sector because, as I spoke about earlier, the mining sector has been a large contributor to our economy from a GDP perspective. So it's important.
Aeysha, thank you very much. It was very insightful. So I look forward to chatting to you guys about this a lot more going forward. Thank you for your participation. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Chris, for inviting me. And I hope to chat to you again in the near future on this. Thank you very much.
100%. Take care.